Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Howdy to all you truck drivers out there, especially the ones I've given a ride to, and keep up the good work. Mark your calendars for July 29th, 2018. World-famous wrestler Ricardo Rodriguez will be sparring with Thunder Rosa at 1303 Iturbide in Laredo, Texas. That's the Dugout. The doors open at 6 p.m. It's only $5 at the door, and kids under 7 get in for free. It's a family-friendly event. Bring the kids. That will be July 29th, only here in Laredo, Texas. Long before Bigfoot was the name we used for large hair-covered creatures seen in the woods, we had other names. Names like the Hairy Man or Wild Man. Some tribes called him Sasquatch or Big Brother. Tribes all across the Americas told about creatures or beings that lived in the woods around them that mostly left folks alone as long as the tribe didn't go messing with them. There were some stories about huge hair-covered creatures that preyed on humans. These were considered to be cannibals because the monsters were thought to be another form of human. The name given to these cannibals was the Stick Indians. They were malevolent and extremely dangerous forest creatures. The details about Stick Indians vary from tribe to tribe, but mostly they are described as large, hairy, Bigfoot-like creatures. In some traditions, Stick Indians have powers to paralyze, hypnotize, or cause insanity, while in others, they merely lead people astray by making eerie sounds of whistling or laughing in the woods at night. In some stories, the Stick Indians may eat people who fell prey to them. They would kidnap children and molest women. They also take aggressive revenge against people who injure or disrespect them, no matter how unintentionally. The Stick Indian would walk around at night looking for unsuspecting people. When the Stick Indian spotted a teepee, they would lift the edge up and shove a stick in under the material. Should anyone inside scream or make frightened noises, the Stick Indian would tear open the teepee and grab the inhabitants. The unfortunate people would be shoved into a basket strapped to the creature's back. Now, this gives an indication of how big these creatures were supposed to be. These baskets could hold several people. Once the basket was full, the Stick Indian would take the captives home to either have them for dinner or keep them as slaves. Not too many traditional legends regarding Stick Indians have been recorded, in part due to taboos related to these deadly creatures. A Stick Indian is an Englishized euphemism. Saying the actual names of these beings in public is considered to be provoking their attacks in some tribes, a belief many native people still adhere to today, choosing to refer to them only in the English, if at all. There is a story about the Champ that comes from the Choctaw Indians. The Champ was a huge hair-covered man who lived in the deepest part of the woods. It had a cave that no one had ever been able to find. The creature had very bad eyesight, but a keen sense... Somebody's calling I don't want to talk to. The champ had bad eyesight, but a keen sense of smell. It was attracted by the smell of blood and would follow anyone who had killed a deer or a bird and try to take the game away from the man carrying it. Should the person not drop the kill and run, the champ would take the hunter as well as the dead animal. When the Choctaw moved from the western part of the continent, the champ followed behind, always making life hard on the hunters. If out hunting in the woods, the Indians would listen for the sound of whistling. This was the indication of a champ was nearby. The champ also smelled so bad, the aroma could kill. A lot of folks had reported smelling something horrible just before encountering a Bigfoot. This is actually only about 30% of the encounters. In 1850s, just before the Civil War, the Choctaw Indians living in Leflore County, Oklahoma, had some trouble with a Bigfoot-type creature. These creatures were known to steal fruit and vegetables from the Indians, but then children began to disappear as well. The local tribe decided they had had enough and set out to find the missing kids and drive the kidnappers from their lands. A party of about 30 men set out to track down these hairy giants. They followed the creatures for most of the day. As the sun was nearing the horizon, the men came to an area of dense woods where no one had ever been brave enough to venture before. As they entered the woods, the smell of death began to grow so intense the men could hardly breathe. The horses began to get skittish, as if there was something lurking nearby that was having an effect on them. As the men came to a clearing, they saw a huge mound built in the center. All around the dirt mound were dead bodies in various stages of decomposition. The bodies looked as if something had been using them for food. On the mound was a group of hairy giants. These were the creatures the men were looking for. As the men charged, they used their pistols to fire at the giants. Many of these monsters ran away, but several stood their ground, intent on killing the charging band of men. As the men got closer to the beasts, a few of them were killed, including their leader. The battle turned into hand-to-hand combat, swords and knives against fists and stones. The Indians soon killed all of the hairy giants. The bodies were left where they fell. The rotting corpses were so numerous, it was decided to simply leave everything where it was. After rounding up their own fallen comrades, the Indians left the area, swearing to never come near it again. There is some speculation as to whether this event ever actually took place. One account had the Indians armed with Henry repeating rifles. The Henry repeating rifle, able to fire 15 .44 caliber rounds without having to reload, wasn't available until 1960. A second account said the leader of the Choctaw, Captain Leflore, was 7 feet tall. Well, back then the average was just under 5'6". After reading a few articles, I can see a lot of inconsistencies. This doesn't make the entire story fake. It looks more like it had been embellished as the years went by. As the story went from one generation to the next, the hero grew in stature as well as height. The Paiute Indians have been living in Nevada area for thousands of years. They have a legend about a bunch of giants Some say they were covered in red hair, and they were making life hard on the tribe for many years. These giants would hunt the Indians for food. The elders decided they had to do something. No one tribe was large enough or powerful enough to take on these giants. The elders called together all the surrounding tribes to band together and destroy this tribe of cannibals. With hundreds of men all working together, the Paiute managed to drive the giants into a cave. Men piled dry brush at the entrance and set it on fire. Any giants that tried to sneak out were met with a hail of arrows. As the fire blazed on, it consumed all the oxygen in the cave, killing all of the remaining giants. Once the cannibal tribe had been vanquished, the tribes all went their separate ways, but they maintained a contact in case anything ever came up, needing a combined effort in order to handle it again. The story of these hairy giants was passed from generation to generation. When European settlers arrived in the area, the story was passed off as being just a wives' tale. Obviously, these locals had an immense imagination. In 1886, a mining engineer named John T. Reed happened to hear the legend from a group of Paiute while prospecting near Lovelock, Nevada. He decided this was just a story to scare kids at night. However, a group of guano collectors have found something that moved the legend to becoming part of history. A guano is better known as bat poop. It is used for fertilizer. With millions of bats all going to the bathroom for thousands of years, the guano on the floor of the cave was 20 feet deep. Makes me want to take a shower just thinking about it. The guano collectors began digging into the mess in the Lovelock cave, thinking they'd found the mother lode of fertilizer. As they dug down through the guano, they uncovered the remains of a giant. The skeleton was over 7 feet tall, and it had 2 rows of teeth, both top and bottom. Soon, the crew had dug up dozens of these huge creatures from the past. The Smithsonian sent in a group of scientists who promptly removed all traces of the giants and then claimed they had never been there. The thing to keep in mind is, there are reports of giants with red hair from all over the world. For thousands of years, people have handed down stories of red-headed giants that had a taste for humans, and they all had double rows of teeth. The Indians had their own names for these giants. Usually the name was either a description of the creature or what they did to people. In 1924, a group of gold miners were camped out near Mount St. Helens. They had built a cabin on their claim, and they were determined to strike it rich no matter what it took. These men were all outdoorsmen. They hunted and fished. They knew what kind of animals lived in that part of the world and how to deal with anything dangerous like a bear or a mountain lion. Around mid-July, they began hearing strange sounds around their site. Branches would be snapped like twigs. Rocks were thrown through the air once in a while. Sometimes they would hear a growl that didn't belong to anything they were familiar with. Then one day, one of the men spotted a huge, hairy monster near the river. He took aim and shot it. The creature let out a howl and took off, running on 2 legs. None of the men had any idea as to what this thing might have been. It had kind of looked like an ape, only much bigger. That night, as the men in the cabin were preparing for a howl came from one side of the cabin. It was followed by a second in the opposite direction. A third and then a fourth howl was heard. The cabin was surrounded. Rocks began to rain down on the roof. Then something smashed the window open and tried to reach inside. The miners all began shooting, trying to drive these monsters away. The creatures would retreat, only to throw more rocks at the cabin and then try attacking again. This went on all night. Needless to say, the men didn't get any sleep that night. Finally, at daybreak, the attackers left. The miners went outside to see how much damage had been done to their cabin. The roof was busted up, but all the rocks landing on it, but it was still in shape. No one wanted to go through a night like that again, so they packed up their belongings and rode back to town. Once they were there, they told everyone what had happened. Today, the area is called Ape Canyon. You can look it up on a map. The men didn't know what a Sasquatch was or the abominable snowman. They thought these giants were giant apes. The term Bigfoot came from an incident that happened in California in 1958. Jerry Crew was a bulldozer operator working on a new road near Humboldt. He was a staunch member of the Baptist Church, and he didn't drink, smoke, or tell lies. Returning to the work camp on a Monday morning, he looked around his bulldozer and saw a set of huge footprints in the dirt. The prints walked around the dozer and then went away down the road and into the trees. Each track was 16 inches long and a barefoot. The steps were 45 to 60 inches each stride. You could do this running, but not into a tree-lined shoulder. As the tracks left the dirt road, they went down a 75-degree slope. This would have been very difficult for anyone to accomplish. Jerry had heard reports of a similar set of tracks being found 8 miles north at Corbell at Mad River earlier that same year. His initial thoughts were that someone was messing around their camp while everybody was gone over the weekend. 2 members of the crew working with Jerry were from the Hoopa tribe. They referred to something living in the woods as being the wild man. A reporter from the Humboldt Times talked to Jerry and the others who had seen the tracks. They all said the same thing. Something with big feet had been walking around the area. This was when people started referring to the wild man as Bigfoot. When somebody was unthinkingly enough to call Jerry Crew a liar, he got extremely mad. Jerry took this as a slight on his personal beliefs. A subcontractor, Ray Wallace, who was in charge of building the road, became mad, thinking somebody was interfering with the construction. Anytime a report about these huge tracks made it into the newspapers, the construction crew would receive visitors wanting to ask questions and see the tracks for themselves. This was hindering completion of the road. He visited the work site, and he found the tracks as well. Ray tried to follow them into the woods, thinking he could find out who was messing around with his workers. The tracks proved to be too much effort, going through places nearly impossible to hike. Ray Wallace hired 2 men to look into who was perpetrating this hoax. Ray Kerr and Bob Breesley were brought in to look into the Bigfoot. One night in October, while watching the road from their pickup, they saw it, squatting in the middle of the road. a huge, hair-covered creature suddenly jumped up and began running away into the brush. The two men tried to follow, but they couldn't track the creature through the thick brush. Ray and Bob brought some hunting dogs out to the work site, hoping these hounds could follow whoever was making such a nuisance of themselves. One night, they heard the sound of someone or something crashing through the brush. They turned the dogs loose on the intruder, hoping this would be the last time anyone snuck around the site. The dogs ran into the brush, barking and snarling, only to come running back out, whining and whimpering. One of the dogs was missing. They never found him. A 55-gallon drum filled with diesel was picked up and thrown into the trees on the side of the road. The men found footprints leading up to where the drum had been sitting. There were no drag marks or indications the fuel drum had been rolled. It had to have been thrown to reach the location where it was found. The drum weighed over 400 pounds. A husband and wife were flying over Bluff Creek one day in their private plane. They spotted the tracks from above and, having heard about these mystery prints, began to follow through the trees. As they flew over the trees, they spotted a huge, hair-covered creature in a small clearing. They passed right over it, but neither of them had a camera. They circled around for a better look, but the Bigfoot had managed to disappear back into the thick trees. Bud Walton, one of the road crew workers, said, "It has been said Ray Wallace made the tracks Jerry Crew found. This could not be further from the actual truth. When the tracks were made, Ray was not in the area. I was one of the lucky ones that saw the tracks before the big craze started." Mr. Oscar Mack, a Yorick Indian elder, said, "The Bigfoot were run out of this country by the miners in 1848 and 49. Before that, there were quite a few of them around here." After Ray Wallace died, and people began to say he had admitted to hoaxing the whole thing. The story was Ray was bored with building a road and decided to play a prank on his workers. He was supposed to have strapped a set of wooden feet onto his boots and then ran along behind a pickup so he could get the enormous stride. Funny how no one ever reported seeing tire tracks mixed in with the Bigfoot tracks. Also, it would have been impossible to drive through the trees. Ray Wallace did have a collection of wooden feet in his garage. He collected all manner of Bigfoot-related things. Ray would pay anyone for photos of prints or casts of tracks. He was also looking for photos of the creature. If Ray was hoaxing the tracks, why was he offering a lot of money for photos and prints, if he could just easily have made his own? Ray was a good friend with several local tribes. He always referred to Bigfoot as being him or her, and never it. If you're interested, the Texas Bigfoot Conference will be held October 19th, 2018, in Jefferson, Texas. There will be a special dinner on October 18th in honor of Bob Gimlin. Tickets are limited, so order yours today. Just go to Texas Bigfoot Conference for all the details. Roger Paterson became interested in Bigfoot after reading an article about the creature by Ivan T. Sanderson in True magazine in December of 1959. In 1962, Roger visited Bluff Creek and interviewed a whole bunch of folks who all had either seen or found tracks of a Bigfoot. In 1964, Roger was taken deep into the woods by Pat Graves, who had found something he wanted to show. It was a set of tracks that looked to be huge human footprints with an enormous stride. Roger Paterson thought it would be great if somebody could find proof that Bigfoot was real. This would be a scientific breakthrough and a great way to make some money. 1967, Roger set out to capture the creature on film. He knew he couldn't do this alone, so he enlisted a friend of his, Bob Gimlin, to help. Roger asked Bob to help out because Bob was a real horseman. He knew the area, and he owned a truck that could haul the trailer. The plan was to set out on horseback into the woods around Bluff Creek to see if they could find and film a Sasquatch. Roger rented a movie camera and bought some film. Then the two set out for the middle of nowhere. They had to camp on the side of the Klamath River and then set out on their horses to see if it was even possible to find this elusive creature. As they rode, Roger would stop and film some of the scenery to add footage to the movie he hoped to make. On the afternoon of October 20th, 1967, Roger and Bob were riding through the trees looking for signs of Bigfoot. Roger's horse suddenly reared up and it fell to the side. Roger's leg was trapped under his mount. That's when they saw the creature. It was huge and covered in dark hair. The creature was walking away from them along the side of the creek. Roger scrambled to pull the camera from his saddlebag. Bob kept an eye on the creature to make sure it didn't turn back towards them. Roger got to his feet and ran towards the creature while trying to film at the same time. He had a sudden thought. What if the creature turned and attacked? He yelled over his shoulder for Bob to cover him. Bob pulled a .30-30 from his saddle holster and racked around into the chamber. The sound was what caused the creature to turn and look back over its shoulder. This can be seen at frame 352. Bob brought the rifle up to his shoulder and waited to see what it would do. Roger managed to get his hand steady enough to shoot a few more frames of film before the camera ran out. After the creature disappeared into the brush, they both stood there in shock, wondering if what they had just seen was real. Roger had caught it on film, but there was no way of telling if the movie would turn out until it had been processed at a film lab. They went over to where the creature had been and looked at the ground. There were several huge footprints in the mud along the creek. Roger wanted to stay and follow the creature, but Bob looked at the sky and said it was going to rain. They had to get out of there and back to town. Bob had to go to work the next day, and the area they were in was prone to flooding. The two had taken the time to cover the tracks with bits of wood and debris so they could come back later and maybe get a cast or two. They rode back to their campsite and loaded everything into Bob's truck and horse trailer, and then they drove away back to civilization. Roger took the film to a lab to get it developed. The footage came out showing the Bigfoot walking along the creek, but it was a bit shaky since Roger had been running while trying to film. The film became known as the P&G film, and the creature became known as Patty, after Roger Paterson. Why a female name? Because once the film had been analyzed, you could see the creature was a female. With that, I'm going to take a brief pause, play a couple of commercials, and drink some coffee, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. Now that's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. Well, now you know that the Paterson Gimlin film is also known as the P&G film, and that the creature has been named Patty. Roger went on the road to promote his movie, and Bob went back to being a cowboy. Some folks who watched the movie became interested in trying to find Bigfoot of their own. Others simply scoffed. They still said there was no such thing as Bigfoot, and it simply had some guy in a costume. Their line of reasoning is, they don't believe it, so therefore it can't be real. The 13 people have claimed to be the guy in the suit. It must have been really crowded in there. The last one said he was supposed to be paid $1,000 to dress up like Bigfoot and walk along the creek for 1 whole minute. $1,000 a minute is pretty darn good pay. That would have been $6,500 today for 1 minute of work. Of course, he had to dress up like a female Bigfoot, so maybe that was why he was supposed to get so much. At first, the costume was something Roger picked up while in Hollywood, California. Then it was supposed to have been made from an old hide. Later, the Bigfoot impersonator said Roger bought a dead gorilla from a circus and used that. It sounds like this imposter can't remember any of the details except for the $1,000 he was supposed to receive. Roger Patterson could have gotten rich in Hollywood if he had taken the Bigfoot costume and said, "This is what I can do." The special effects people would have hired him in seconds had he shown them his film and said he had created the costume. Instead, Roger spent the rest of his life looking for more evidence that Bigfoot was real. Roger Patterson died 1972, still looking for more signs of Bigfoot. Bob Gimlin never got any money from the film. He went back to work as a cowboy until being convinced to tell his story. I met Bob Gimlin in Tyler, Texas at a Bigfoot conference. He says the creature looked real to him, and he had no reason to think it was a hoax. Bob was interviewed by a con artist named Packham. Packham asked Bob a bunch of questions on the phone, and he recorded the interview. Then Packham spliced and diced the tape until he had it sounding as if Bob was saying the whole P&G film was a scam. Bob later heard the interview on the radio, and it made him mad enough he refused to be interviewed for a long time after that. I wrote a book called Creature. It's fiction. It's been out a few years. Something is killing people in Camel County. Jake Conroy, a Bigfoot hunter, stumbles right into the heart of the scene. As he tries to write a book on the subject, he finds himself falling deeper into the unexplained. His contact, Squatch Chaser, feeds him information as he and his nephew try to get to the heart of the matter. It's a fun read if you'd like to get a copy at where else? Amazon.com. Back when I was young, I used to watch a TV cartoon called Tom Slick. I had no idea there was a real-life character the show was based on. It would have been far more entertaining had they portrayed his real-life adventures. Thomas Baker Slick, Jr. was born May 6, 1916, and he died October 6, 1962. He was the San Antonio, Texas inventor, businessman, and adventurer. He was the heir to an oil business. The Slick's father, Thomas Baker Slick Sr., was known as the King of the Wildcatters and had made a fortune during the Oklahoma oil boom of 1910. During the 50s, Slick turned his attention to expeditions to investigate the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti, Bigfoot, and the Trinity Alps giant salamander. Slick's interest in cryptozoology was little known until 1989 publication of the biography Tom Slick and the Search for the Yeti, which was written by Loren Coleman. Coleman continued his study of Tom Slick, and in 2002 he wrote Tom Slick, True Life Encounters in Cryptozoology. I read the second book, and it is well worth looking into. Come to think of it, I have a signed copy on my shelf right now. Tom wanted to know if the Yeti was a real creature, so he would lead expeditions into the Himalayan mountains looking for evidence. When the business got in the way of his adventures, Slick would hire others to go looking. Sometimes these men would be paid to sit in a cave and watch the mountain trails with binoculars and cameras. Slick was known for sparing no expense when it came to cryptozoology. His family were somewhat concerned he was going to spend the entire fortune. Slick died in a plane crash in 1962 that many believe was not an accident. It happened right after a confrontation amongst the family members asking Tom to knock it off with all this Bigfoot nonsense. Check out Tom Slick, True Life Encounters in Cryptozoology at Amazon.com. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure you will too. Today, there are a lot of Bigfoot enthusiasts. They come from all walks of life. College-educated folks with degrees to common working men and women. Most have one thing in common. We all saw the same movie. The Legend of Boggy Creek is a 1972 horror docudrama about the Fouke monster, a Bigfoot-type creature that had been seen in and around Fouke, Arkansas since the 1950s. The film mixes interviews with some local residents who have had encounters with the creature, along with reenactments of some of these encounters. Charles B. Pierce, an advertising salesman from Texarkana on the Arkansas-Texas border, managed to borrow $100,000 from a local trucking company. He then used an old 35mm movie camera, and he would hire local people, usually high school students, to help make the 90-minute film. The film has generated about $20 million in box office revenue, and it's still available today on DVD. In Lyle Blackburn's exciting book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, The True Story of the Fouke Monster, and The Legend of Boggy Creek, there are stories of a three-toed Bigfoot. Lyle tells the story about how the legend of Boggy Creek came into being. He has become the go-to guy anytime someone in Fouke, Arkansas area has an encounter. Just recently, Lyle received a call from a woman who saw the creature in broad daylight. She was driving to town at about 10 a.m. After a few minutes, she remembered she'd forgotten something at home, so she pulled over and turned around. Right in the middle of the road stood a hair-covered creature. It was about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. When it saw her looking at it, the creature turned and ran into the trees. The woman was shook up by the encounter, and she didn't want anybody to think she was crazy. She told Lyle about the encounter because sometimes you have to talk about things to put them into perspective. She said it couldn't have been a Bigfoot because it was too small. Lyle explained to her how a juvenile Bigfoot would have been about that size. Hoaxers are out there. I have my own personal idea as to what we should do to them when they get caught. It involves a potato peeler and a bag of salt. I used to listen to Coast AM all the time, and I do mean all the time. I have hundreds of shows on CD, all squirreled away on my bookshelves. Back in 2005, a man who claimed to be a Bigfoot researcher, I won't mention his name, let's just call him Tom. Tom said he was going to place cameras all over a wooded mountainous location called Happy Camp, California. People were encouraged to sign up and pay a subscription fee so they could watch the cameras and hopefully spot a Bigfoot. Tom said this way they would have thousands of eyes watching all across the area, and this would increase the possibility of seeing Bigfoot. I think he was charging $20, but I'm not too sure. I was going to send in my money, but I got busy doing other things, and I just never got around to it. Then Tom called in, claiming they had captured a small Bigfoot, and it was being examined by veterinarians as he spoke. He was going to place the creature in front of a camera, and everyone who had paid for the privilege, would be able to gaze upon this magnificent creature. Tom suddenly claimed that someone had stolen the Bigfoot from their camp, and a posse was out trying to chase the scoundrel down. The sheriff's department was about to set up a roadblock at the bottom of the mountain road. Now all of this was going out over the radio. I was listening at work, and at first I thought maybe we would finally see a real live Bigfoot. As Tom kept updating the audience, he kept sounding more and more like a liar than an actual Bigfoot investigator. His words sounded scripted instead of enthusiastic. It finally came to light. The whole deal was a giant scam to steal money from coast-to-coast audience. The host did his best to get Tom to refund everyone's money. I very seriously doubt that ever happened. And then Tom was banned from ever being on the show again. Some folks just never know when to give up. In 2008, the discovery of a dead Bigfoot was announced in just about every newspaper in America. A Georgia sheriff's deputy said he had gotten this dead Bigfoot from a couple of kids who found it out in the woods. And then Tom came forward to say that, yes, this was a Bigfoot. The body was frozen in ice to supposedly preserve it. Well, just about every Bigfoot researcher, the real ones, the ones I know, all said it looked more like a gorilla costume frozen in ice, along with some organs from a dead animal. Tom, along with his co-hoaxer, Rick, both berated everyone for being narrow-minded and said everyone was mad simply because these two had a Bigfoot on ice. Literally. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. It was indeed a frozen gorilla costume. What blows my mind is there are still a few folks out there that think Tom and Rick are genuine researchers. I guess P.T. Barnum was right. There is a sucker born every minute. In 2016, a Bigfoot-type creature was spotted around Lake Findlay, just north of Alice, Texas. The lake is sometimes referred to as Lake Alice. Folks have reported hearing strange guttural sounds coming from the woods around the lake. They've heard brush being crushed under what sounds like a two-legged beast as it walked through the trees. This was reported to the Alice police, who would send units out to check on any strange activity. Gabriel Guerrero, a South Texas Bigfoot investigator, has visited the lake on several dates. He thinks it is possible a Bigfoot is passing through the area on occasion. I've talked to Gabriel at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson. I visited the location and I had a look for myself. I then went into town and I talked to the Alice police. I got to talk to a few folks, but nobody could really put any information out. It was still being considered as possible investigation. The area right around the lake is filled with trees, but after you get away from the lake, it turns into farmland. It's open in every direction. This would make travel by a Bigfoot rather conspicuous, since anyone driving within a half mile would spot him. Unless Bigfoot uses some other means of travel. There are those who say Bigfoot can step in and out of other dimensions. If this were the case, then it isn't all that hard to imagine a Bigfoot or two in and around Lake Findlay. A friend of mine named Joe was driving back from Corpus Christi at about 4 a.m. in 2007. As he was between Freer and Laredo, he spotted a couple of deer grazing on the side of the road. As he was looking at the deer, he noticed a large, hairy creature was standing just a short ways from them. The thing was human-shaped, and its arms hugged down at its side. Comparing it to the barbed wire fence, the creature stood about 7 feet tall. The creature was looking at the two deer as if contemplating dinner. Joe had been a paranormal investigator for years and immediately thought he should go back and see if he could see more of the creature and at least find some tracks. Turning his pickup around, he drove back to where he had seen the Bigfoot. As Joe was slowly approaching the spot, he was overcome by a sudden feeling of dread. It was as if something bad was about to happen, and happened to him. It was all Joe could do to continue driving by the fence where the hairy creature had been. Joe didn't see it, but his attention was riveted to feelings he couldn't explain. As he drove past the spot and drove further to the east, the feeling seemed to lessen. He now knew he would have to turn around once more and drive back through the area where he'd felt so much fear. Turning around once more, Joe drove past the spot and carefully looked in all directions for the beast as he gave his truck the gas. He sped by, hoping the strange creature wouldn't jump out in front of him. Once he was safely back in Laredo, Joe made a note of what he'd seen and felt. I talked to him while writing the book, The Laredo Paranormal Research Society, and Joe gave me his notes on what he'd seen and felt that night, along with a sketch of what had been there. I've heard a lot of reports of people having unexplainable feelings of dread when encountering a Bigfoot. Even when well armed and in a group, they say it was all they could do to not run for home. Nick Redfern thinks this might be some form of ultrasound. Ultrasound isn't just a theory. The Army has conducted experiments on voluntold using ultrasound. If you were ever in the military, you'll know what a voluntold is. If not, well, you're told you will volunteer or else. Been there, done that. During these experiments, the soldiers were told to stand in one place, and then a machine emitting ultrasound was aimed at them. The soldiers all said they had a sudden feeling of absolute dread, followed by a few moments of unconsciousness. The Army is looking into crowd control methods, and ultrasound looks like it's their favorite new toy. I know this is trying to explain an unknown using more bizarre ideas. We won't know what all Bigfoot is capable of until we actually sit down with one and talk to it. For thousands of years, Indians living all across the Americas have talked about large, hair-covered creatures that lived in the woods. Some believe these were just another form of man that didn't associate with the locals. Usually these creatures didn't bother anyone as long as you didn't bother them. Then there are reports of Bigfoot activity, hunting men as food. This would make finding Bigfoot a lot more exciting if it were true. There are Bigfoot-type creatures all over the world. In the Himalayas, they're called the abominable snowman, or the yeti. In Australia, they call him the yowie. China's Bigfoot is known as the Yeren. In Russia, he's known as Iceman. No matter what it's called, the description is about the same. Huge, covered in hair, lives out in the wilderness. I, for one, do believe that Bigfoot does exist, but it travels from one dimension to another for its own reasons. This would explain how these creatures can be seen in so many locations, while at the same time remaining hidden. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, be sure and tell your friends to listen up as well. You can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com, or you can find the archives at strangethings.podomatic.com. And don't forget, July 29th, 2018, you can go see the world-famous wrestler Ricardo Rodriguez, as well as Thunder Rosa, at the Dugout, 1303 Iturbide, here in Laredo, Texas. The doors open at 6 p.m., and it's $5 to get in. Kids 7 years and under get in free. It's a family-oriented entertainment. That's July 29th, only here in Laredo.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.